So we're really trying to focus on how the class is structured because a lot of the responses we got from the students, from our group at least when we interviewed them, is that they've never had a class like this before. And so because of that, I think it's interesting to see your ideologies behind the structure of the class and how you think maybe the transitions that the students might have to make would benefit them. Just how do you think in general this structure will benefit the students in the long run?
Just generally, the way we look at it, we're restoring the laboratories to kind of the authentic way they were designed to be back in the day. It was active learning environments were generated. They were these labs, so you didn't just sit in an active lecture classroom. You had these labs. They were like studios. They were almost like maker spaces where people would actually go and do science, and that was the point of them. And obviously science is a skill, it's a practice. So that's the way labs were built. But over the years, they seem to have changed, and they slowly became a place where people would just follow instructions, and if they got things done, then they left. And it became a very passive, weird place where no authentic research happened. So in our work, we just decided we thought we'd try to bring back or restore. It's like restoring an old house. We're trying to restore the lab experience to what it was supposed to be, and it's sort of lost its way.
So what's like the point of doing this? Like, what's your overall goal in the lab?
Well, we're gonna try and see if we can like successfully create primers so that we can like pinpoint the location of the F508 mutation, which is ours in particular that we chose, and so we can kind of make an assay to see like if a certain strand of DNA has a mutation or not.
So the weird thing is, like, when we played with the lab and restored it to people doing science, then they actually did authentic experiments. They had to look at research papers. They had to look at figures and stuff. And then the lab was the active place where real science was going on. And it didn't even kind of make sense. It didn't even connect to the lecture, because the lecture was still it was like a passive place where we just studied what are the right answers. Like, we just looked at books that could have been encyclopedias and read pages and memorized things. So it didn't make any sense. So recently then we've kind of brought the lecture to be more of the same thing, and now they match.
Well, as far as the lecture goes, it kind of feels like flipped classroom because we do a lot of the readings outside, and then we talk about it in class, which I find really helpful because then I can get questions answered like in class. And then for a lab, it seems like we kind of like make our own experiments instead of like following like a cookbook kind of lab. Which I think is helpful for my learning because like it kind of forces me to think like a scientist would in a lab, which is really, really cool. And I think both in both lecture and lab we're kind of doing stuff for ourselves rather than being spoon fed, which is really cool. So doing like outside research and stuff is really important before coming to lab because if you're not prepared, then you get into lab and you kind of have to read through what you're doing, and you kind of have to figure out stuff as you go.
Yeah, so initially when we changed the labs and made them into really doing science, we decided we wanted to assess if it worked. And at the time, we could have taken some exam that was built by education guys and used it and seen if they did better on that. But at the time, we realized the people in physiology department are not going to be convinced by some exam built by some education expert, but they would be by the MCAT.
Do you have any previous lab experience? Like in class or research?
Nothing like this. I've had like previous experience with like LV-144 lab and like just like chemistry lab, but like nothing what Dr. Luck is doing.
So, you're almost done with the class, right?
Yep.
How is it?
Well, I'm thinking I'm on track. I have a guaranteed 3.5, but this last manuscript grade is going to make my 4 or not.
Class is good. I passed my verbal final like a week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so I've just been chilling.
I really like it. It was a lot of work at first, but now it's starting to like calm down and everything.
Okay.
I think it was worth taking.
Would you say you thought it was worth taking like in the first few weeks? Or?
I was really scared, and I was like, at first I was like, what am I getting myself into? I don't know anything. I don't know what's happening. But like now it's just like, I think I've learned a lot from it. So
We have a presentation that's basically just a status report of like how we are doing with our abstracting figures, because I'm assuming that they want to see how far into our experiment we've gotten. We haven't gotten as far as I had hoped, but hopefully this week we'll get good enough DNA to use our published primers on, and then we'll be able to order, well actually this week and next week, but we'll be able to order our design primers for our final portion.
Okay, can you
DNA.
explain what that final portion is? So what do you
So we are getting design primers to detect Delta 508 in mutant DNA.
Efficiency is important because we don't have that much time. I mean, yeah, I know we have an hour and 50-minute lab twice a week, but that's, you know, given what we're trying to do, that's not a whole lot of time, considering that, like, you know, accounting for failed experiments and trying to fix those and troubleshooting and all that.
And does that happen a lot?
Happens plenty. It happens all the time.
Really?
Yeah, like recently I just realized for our design, or for our published primers, I've been using a annealing temperature that was 10 degrees too high
Oh wow.
for the last 2 weeks.
And so, could you elaborate more on like some skills that you've picked up over the semester and things that you've improved on, maybe your work ethic, I don't know, just whatever you think you've improved on through the class?
I think like everything, like with like definitely working with like time management, with like trying to like do like the verbal and everything, and like being able to like work with other people with our experiments, and like collaborating and like troubleshooting ideas off of each other. And I can definitely see like how far I've came, because I remember the first time we had to explain photosynthesis in class. Completely embarrassed myself in front of the whole class. But now it's like I understand it, and like I know a lot about it. So it's just like it was cool to like be able to like see myself like learn new things and like grow throughout the class.
All these things build on each other, right? So if you want to prepare for the things, you want to prepare for the things in the future, so you can actually get like the entire manuscript done.
So it's like a real lab.
Yeah, it's like we are in control of our own research, which is just sweet. But like, it's added work because it's not laid out for us. It's not like, oh, here's a due date, like get done by this date. You know, we just have the end due date, and they're like, get done by then, or you're gonna face the consequences, basically. But no, like I really do like that it's not structured, because we get to decide what's the most important to us. Like, if we want to move on, we can move on. Like, it's not like, oh, you have to get this. Like, of course it's going to help you. It's going to be a positive control. But you don't have to get it. Move on. Like, do something more important. That type of thing. So, when I first got to this class, I was like, oh, you know, it's going to be hard. I heard, like, oh, it's hard, it's a lot of work, like, all this stuff. But then I think that it didn't really hit me until, like, the second week, when we found out about really writing the manuscript and all that goes into that. And we found out about like the verbal, like we started to hear about the verbal more and things like that. And I was pretty confused. I was like, why is all this stuff like building up? And then I realized like that I'm gonna be doing that stuff throughout the entire class. And I kind of like found out a way to like be able to prepare for lecture, be able to prepare for the tests, because I was really just preparing for like the whole class rather than just that test or just that next lecture. Like I was really like getting like grounds for like the entire class, because what I think the main portion of the first part of the class is like it's establishing like grounds to learn higher level stuff. So like we learn about like heritable material, and then we learn about PCR, and we learn about like all the basics of lab and the basics of what we're learning about in lecture. And then like as we go throughout the lecture or as we go throughout the year, we get to like experience like higher level thinking and trifecting and all that kind of stuff.
So the freedom is great. because we get to kind of move forward in our own experiments according to what we want to change. It's not like following a cookbook lab. Like you're not like do this. It's more of like okay, I can figure out how to do this on your own, and then use that information to move forward. So that's helped me because it helps me think critically. It helps me. It kind of like simulates like what it's like to really be in a lab working.
So we probably started changing the labs, and they became kind of a version of what they are now in the year 2000. So at the millennium, sort of things happened, and we committed more strongly to the format. So what normally is, normally at the university in introductory science labs, you just go there for like 3 hours. They tell you to do things, you follow instructions. If the solution turns green at the end, they say that was good. If it turns red, they say that was bad. You ask, are you done? Are we done now? They say yes, and you leave. And no one even knows whatever happened. Even the best students only figure out what happened when they try to write up a report. And then they're like, oh, afterwards, that was so cool. I figured out what happened. But yeah, so that format is a weird format. It has nothing to do with doing science. So we just sort of switched to going to do science again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
That was awesome.
But yeah, so my biggest takeaway, being able to do research on my own, being able to think for myself, use those study skills that I've acquired in class and in lab to move forward in classes that I have to take in the future. The work ethic is really what I'm proud of because this class built it up so much.
And lastly, or that was lastly, do you regret taking this class?
Not at all. Not at all. The first 5 weeks is kind of the hardest part of the class, and I was like, actually my friend suggested me to take this class, and I was like, all right, fine. And the first 5 weeks came, and I was like, why? Why did I take this class? Like, it's so much work. It's like more work than like my hardest classes that I thought would be like the most difficult. But then after that, I realized it got easier as the semester went on, and even though it's a lot of work, this class really sets you up for success later on in your college career and even moving after that.
Okay,
so,
cool.
No regrets.
Awesome. Cool.